for me, photography is that self-care. Like that's what forces me to go out in nature. I love taking photography of landscapes, and it forces me to be in the woods alone and just take deep breaths. And if I don't, do photography, a lot of times I'll just be inside working all day. And so again, I'm kind of making it also a hobby that makes money for me, but that is my way of self-care. And I know a lot of, obviously in this book, you're teaching people how to do self-care, but I know that even as much as I talk about taking care of yourself and emotional well-being and all that, I still backslide and I'm kind of hypocritical in my own advice at times. Do you find it challenging at times to kind of stay on top of all the things that you do to keep that balance?
Oh, yeah. And it's endemic in the nonprofit sector. There's this great study, Well-being Inspires Well-doing, that just the percentage of people who are experiencing burnout or like that their job is detrimental to their mental health is really, it's really high. Um, for me, my greatest self-care is actually attending to my mental and emotional health. Um, because if and like it sounds like for you being out in wilderness does that. And there's like forest baths. Absolutely. Like there's tons of research that just being in wilderness is in and of itself de facto healing and good for your mental health and emotional health. And the part of this, the things that I point to in the book, that if your agreements are off or you have something you want to say, but you just can't get yourself to say it, or somebody's micromanaging you, or you're feeling that kind of oppression of that in some way and you don't know what to do about it. Even for me, even if I'm in a walk in the woods, I'm just ruminating and like bitching to myself in my head about this thing. So a big part of my own kind of practice in mental health is putting into practice the things that are in this book, so that then when I go to the botanic gardens, I can just enjoy it versus just be bitching to myself in my head, which, because I've spent like way too much time doing that over the years.
Yeah. It's interesting you bring that up. It's something I've really thought about lately of like, I spend a lot of emotional energy having conversations in my head with somebody without actually having the conversation with that person. I'm taking on all the negative emotion of what could happen negatively in this conversation
Oh yeah.
without actually having, and a lot of times I'll have the conversation and it's not negative at all, but I've exerted so much energy just mapping out in my head what's going to happen if I bring this up or have this conversation. So yeah, I've realized I have to take a step back, and sometimes, and yes, it's good to pre-plan and think about where things might go, but don't harp on it so much that now you've already exhausted yourself before you have the conversation.
Absolutely. I spent literally weeks riding the Q train from Brooklyn into the city, rehearsing quitting to my boss, who I love dearly. Like, I love this woman dearly, but I would have these imaginary conversations in my head of like, she's going to criticize you for that, which maybe she wasn't even criticizing me, right? Like maybe it was just feedback, but I interpreted it as criticism. And then I'm going to be like, but you don't understand. And then she's going to say this, and then I'm going to say that and be like, I quit, and like stomp off. Like I had that conversation like probably 30 times in my head. And then we met. It was like a fine conversation. I'm like, what am I doing this myself? I have in the book, these are the steps for speaking unarguably, so that you can speak your truth in a way that has a really high likelihood of resolving the issue instead of making it worse. And it's like step by step, like I have to follow it myself still. Like, okay, what is unarguably true? Because it's an essential skill that can basically get you out of having those conversations in your head all the time.
I like that. Well, I'm looking forward to reading through that myself and following those guidelines. But I also still want to touch too on the podcast you have, Unleashing Social Change podcast. And I know we've kind of come to the end of this current season, but what I really loved about this season was you were talking to your mentors. And actually you started off with actually one of your mentors interviewing you, because as you said in that podcast, like these mentor-mentoree relationships are reciprocal. Even if we don't always think of them that way, we can learn from each other, even if you are the mentee, speaking to the mentor. But can you talk about why you had that intention of wanting to have your mentors on this season?
Yeah, so for the first 3 seasons, I interviewed people who are leading large scale change about what they're doing and what they're learning and all that stuff. But in a lot of ways, and I love those interviews and I think they're fascinating, and the stuff that people are doing to make the world a better place, they're so cool. But I kind of wanted to get to the dirty laundry, I kind of wanted to get to the real stuff and be more vulnerable, be more true about what's hard, what's going on. And I didn't want to ask Nicole Hockley, who's like the founder of Sandy Hook Promise, whose son was massacred at Sandy Hook, to be like, tell me how you suck. You know what I mean? Like, I just didn't like, I wanted to focus on her. But I do want to kind of pivot the podcast that way into where it's just kind of a little bit more, more vulnerable, more raw. And I was thinking about it and I was like, man, my mentors are just the most ballsy people in the world and they don't give a shit. You know what I mean? And so so I'm like, if I just call them, and they were like, yeah, Beck, sign me up, and they all shared something that I was like, oh my God, I didn't even know that about you, so I was like, well, and now what I feel like I can say for season 5 is, if like the assistant secretary for peacekeeping at the United Nations can do this, you can do this. Like, let's be real with each other about what's going on, and so I wanted them to sort of set the bar high, and they delivered for sure.
Oh no, it's beautiful. And like getting to even hear your aunt, in that final episode of the season, like one, I was just, joking a little bit earlier with our team of just like how my preconceived notion of like what a nun, a sister would be as an interview. I'm like, oh no, I want to hang and like have a beer with this lady. She is so awesome. Like I wish she was my aunt and godmother. She is so amazing. But I also see why you are a lot of the way that you are. And I think that was the beauty of this season too. Like we got to learn so much more about you just through the people who have influenced you.
That's so generous of you to say. And I tell you what, I was stressed out about something. I couldn't sleep, and my aunt's on the East Coast. And at 4:30 this morning, I texted her. And I was like, I need to, I need to call my lifeline here. And she was like, we're doing prayers. You can call me in 45 minutes. I was like, add some extra prayers for me to the big pug in the sky. Like I mess with her about not really all the way believing in that stuff anyway. And so, she was totally there for me. And you're right. Like she's an amazing human being. And I've just been so fortunate, right? It's like how lucky, and for all of us that we help each other, see things that we're not noticing, and have a different perspective on things. That's what it's all about, right? We're just all in Earth School,
And I think what also I noticed in just those conversations, just the different work that all the different people do. So like I think that's just also a lesson in terms of how we surround ourselves with the right kind of people that are going to help to educate us in different ways. Like you don't want all your friends to be exactly the same way because you're not going to get the most out of that experience. If you have people who are coming from diverse backgrounds or are working on different kinds of things, it's going to open up your perspective to the world and also just how you do business too.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I thought it's definitely a risk bringing in people, from the military, but I'm like, give them a minute because they'll blow you away. They'll blow you away. And their leadership examples are just so, and their challenges were so profound for me to hear.